Peter, in trying to understand the divine attributes, the one that I like talking about most is divine freedom, God's freedom, because it seems to fight with some of the other attributes, maybe more significantly than others. How do you understand God's freedom?
Well, freedom is freedom no matter who has it, even God. So God's freedom, first of all, I think we should say what freedom is and then see how we can apply this notion to God. I don't really like talking in terms of abstract nouns like freedom when I can avoid it. That is, I like to say that, well, to say that someone is free, is to say sometimes when a person makes that person makes choices, the person is able to do both of the things that when he chooses between them, he was able to make the other choice. Mm-hmm. So I would say the same thing about God. Sometimes God makes choices, and when he makes the one choice, he was able to make the other choice.
Now, I can give you examples of choices that perhaps God can't make. Classically, a decision that is that would lead to a sin or to a moral evil. Some would say even to a less best situation, if there is a best in that case. If God cannot do that because of God's character or God's goodness, then God is to some extent not free.
Well, all of us are to some extent not free, and probably we would like to be. I don't suppose, for example, I think this is literally true, that I am not able to punch you in the nose right now in these circumstances.
But you are able to do it if you're not metaphysically constrained. You are a good person. You like me as a friend. You may be a little tired.
All these things are parts of my being at the present moment. So metaphysically, I guess if what metaphysically constrains me is the parts of my being, I guess they do metaphysically constrain me. I am simply unable to punch you in the nose.
But there's
right
a
now.
difference in what you're saying. If you didn't have any arms, I would say that's a different characteristic of your being unable to punch me in the nose.
There would be an additional reason for me being.
But that would be additional and sufficient.
Well, I think my present mental state is sufficient for my being unable to punch you in the nose.
Would you say they're the equivalent of your mental state not being able to punch me and you having no arms not being able to punch me?
I'm not sure what you mean by equivalent. They're both true, and the word able means the same thing in both cases.
Yeah, I would see a difference. I would see an affirmative decision.
Okay, here's the difference. If I chose to punch you in the nose right now, I probably would. Whereas if I didn't have arms, if I chose to punch you in the nose, I wouldn't. All right, so what? I can't choose to punch you in the nose. Imagine a dish full of red candies. You offer one to Jake. Jake happens to have a pathological aversion to the sight of blood. The candies happen to be the color of blood. Jake is not only unable to take a candy, he's unable to choose to take one. He's unable to form the act of assent to taking one in his mind, though he would very much like to have one if they weren't that color. All right, but he's unable to take one, right? Just as unable as if he had no arms. Maybe not for the same reason. And it's true that if he had no arms, then if he did choose to take one, he would. Well, it's true in this case, too. I suppose that if he did choose to take one, he would, but he can't choose. He can't make that choice. God's inabilities are all like that. He can't make that choice because making that choice would be inconsistent with his nature. So he can't lie, for example, because choosing to lie would be inconsistent with his nature.
In that case, we get into more complexities. Suppose a lie would lead to a future good. I mean, let's say the future is open in some way and God is doing planning and something he had promised at one time and the free action of free creatures all combined together and suddenly what God had said was the wrong decision because of a lot of free creatures making free decisions. And God decides, well, I better lie because the better good is to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, well, a human Certainly a human ruler, governor, might decide to lie for that reason. I think there's a matter of revealed theology, I suppose, that most theologians suppose that God is unable to lie. He wouldn't lie to get the good that's needed, he'd have to employ some other means. But I mean, this is only an example, right? We shouldn't get hung up on the example of God. I mean, this is supposed to be something God can't do. He can't lie. He can't break promises. He can't change the past.
Right.
But that's actually an example of something that he can't. That I wouldn't be accurate to say he can't do because he can't choose to do it. It is true that he can't choose to change the past because, of course, nobody probably can choose to do what they know. You probably can't choose to rise 10 feet into the air right now.
Right. So, but I think there are two things here that are different. One thing's God can't do because they're logically impossible in some way. So God can't create a married bachelor. God can't recreate the past in some way. God can't make it the case that I never existed. That's impossible, even for God. Right. But for God to make a decision that would be a suboptimal decision or to be morally wrong, the question is whether God is metaphysically unable to do it, and it's just an absolute impossibility, a rigid impossibility, as opposed to a character ongoing possibility.
Well, his character...
You're saying there's no difference between
his character is rigid, you say. I say...
Doesn't that limit his freedom?
my character in my present mental states make it impossible for me to punch you in the nose. But, of course, they could change.
Right.
Whereas God's character can't change. So not at any given moment he's unable to break a promise for the same kind of reason that I'm now unable to punch you in the nose. But the big difference is there that in his case it's metaphysically impossible for that to change, whereas in my case it is metaphysically possible for it to change.
I better sit a little further back.
Yes, yeah, I would think so.
So overall, what is your feeling about God's freedom? Is it limited? Does God have maximum freedom?
Well, he has the freedom to make choices between actions that are consistent with his, such that making them is consistent with his nature, and that are for example, I think he had a free choice between creating something and not creating anything. Possibly he had a free choice.
Well, God. Some people would say that that's impossible for God because God is giving and loving, etc. Therefore, he had no choice because he had to give of himself to create. Where do you stop?
Because, that is the mind of the church has been different on that one because they say things wouldn't be any better if God had created, and then if he hadn't created. Creating, not creating, neither is better than the other. No good comes into existence. He's already got, there's already full and perfect love between the persons of the Trinity, according to Christianity, so there would be no, and in fact, even you have the good of two persons cooperating to give a good to a third thing. That's why there are three persons in the Trinity, according to Hugh of St. Victor. So no good, in fact, the real mystery is why God would bother to create anything at all. But since he did, he was able to. I mean, we human beings choose between incommensurable goods. That is, I imagine a woman choosing between going to the Harvard Law School and going to the Juilliard School of Music. Incommensurable goods. One is for Juilliard is for personal fulfillment. Harvard Law School is for social usefulness. There's no way to add up in a John Stuart Mill kind of way pluses and minuses and say which would be the better world, make for a better world. And yet people do make such decisions.
And so does God.
And, well, why not, at any rate? That is, if we don't understand free will very well, in my view. But if we don't understand it in the case of persons, I don't think that we're going to understand it well enough in the case of God to say there's a problem here about why God would choose one thing rather than the other when there wasn't some good reason to choose this one. I don't know that maybe God is constrained by his nature if state of affairs A is better than state of affairs B, maybe God is constrained by his nature to choose A if he chooses either. But if they're of equal value, I think states of affairs can be of equal value, even total states of affairs, and what God chooses to do then can't be simply a product of his nature. The Platonic one, it's just a world of lesser beings emanates from it. It doesn't have any choice in the matter. I think whether there's a created world at all, it does depend on God's free choice.